Welcome back to the show. Today I'm joined by Nathan Cowan from Premium Service Brands, an organization supporting multiple home service franchise brands across the country. Nathan has a unique perspective because he's not just working inside one business, he's helping scale multiple brands simultaneously, which creates a completely different view of what predictable growth really looks like. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Appreciate it.
Okay. Nathan, I always like starting at the beginning because most careers don't follow a straight path. Walk us through your journey. How did you get into franchising and service brands in the first place?
Yeah. So, like most, I fell into franchising completely by accident. I started with my own business right out of college. And as we got to a point where we were ready to sell that and do something new, I was coaching English classes for a learning center, just to pass the time and to figure out what I wanted to do. And that ended up being a franchise. And one of the regional managers came in and said, I looked at your background. What the heck are you doing just tutoring? You need to be working on our franchise side. So without knowing anything about franchising, I just kind of hopped in there and started working with Learning Center franchise. It was a Korean-based company. So we did everything from the development piece to helping owners build out their locations and ongoing support, and pretty much the whole gambit there. And then kind of rolled into another role doing medical weight loss franchises, which turned into chiropractic franchises for the same group. And then went to glass repair and plumbing. And now we're in the garage space. So it's kind of been a very broad journey. I've run the gambit of positions in franchising, but it definitely gives me kind of a unique perspective of the challenges of running businesses compared to working within this corporate kind of umbrella. So it's kind of how I got here today.
Great story, Nathan. And this podcast is called Growth Without Referrals. And the premise is simple. Referrals are powerful, but they're unpredictable. And at some point, businesses need something more consistent. In the franchise world, how important are referrals still today?
So I would say franchises rely heavily on referrals, and that probably won't go away. But I will say that the mix of marketing and the dependence on referrals has evolved quite a bit, especially with the implementation of AI pieces and some of that. And I think that also is very different by industry. So if you're working in the home space area, referrals are incredibly important, but other service-based, businesses like massage or anything that's food related, the referral piece is not as critical of a component there. So I think it depends on the industry specifically.
Okay. And thank you. And Nathan, what signals tell you a company is too dependent on referrals?
Yeah. So any business, in my experience, that is relying too heavily on one specific thing, whether that's, pay-per-click or some type of digital campaign, or entirely on referrals, to me, that's a red flag. The name of the game from a marketing standpoint today is diversifying that and just trying to figure out where your best return on investment is. And so for me, if referrals is the primary source of where leads come from, that can definitely waver and cause a lot of problems in the brands. If there's not a diversified strategy overall, then that's always a red flag for me.
Okay. And what makes your role especially interesting is that you're not just scaling one brand, you're helping scale multiple brands at once. And that creates complexity most leaders never see. What does scalable growth actually look like when you're managing growth across several brands?
That's a good question. Scalability has to be very calculated and planned in advance. And always, especially in franchising space, scalability doesn't work if you bite off more than you can chew. We kind of call it chasing shiny objects. So if the funding isn't there, if the staffing isn't there, if the operational components and checklists aren't in place to make sure that the smooth transition between what's happening existing in that space and then new growth and acquisition of additional business, it is entirely dependent on how organized you are and how well planned out that is. So, for us, before we ever start looking at that scalability, we're looking at internal systems to make sure that the support and the marketing and all of those pieces are really in place to make sure that scalability is even possible. So that's a huge piece. And then the actual scaling is, ready to happen naturally after you've got the people and the systems and the money in place to do it well. So that's kind of how we approach it.
Okay. And what systems or processes have had the biggest impact?
Yeah. So the internal systems of distribution, how are you going to get the materials? Do you have the capital to maintain operating the existing space, in addition to what you're building out and scaling to? Do your current staff have the capacity to take on more management roles? What's the support system going to look like is huge for us. So from a standard operating procedures standpoint, if something breaks in the scaled part, do we have systems in place to manage not only this new venture and growth, but also the existing locations? So the SOPs is like the tag word for us is what are our standard operating procedures to support that scaling.
Okay. And Nathan, where do businesses underestimate the difficulties of scaling?
Financially is the first one.
Okay.
I think people tend to assume that the first location or the first office or however you're scaling is going to be able to financially support a second location, but you're doubling your costs. And a business may be trucking along and doing well in its existing space, but is there capacity from a financial standpoint to carry and hold a location until it breaks even and gets to that point where it's self-sustaining? And a lot of times what happens is that takes longer than expected. And so you can have this gap in time where this original business or office or whatever you're working with is trying to carry the costs of two, and it's a much longer period than expected. And that really causes strain and frustration for sure. So I think that is one of the biggest ones, is underestimating the costs and whether or not the original can handle covering that for an extended period of time.
That's a great insight. Thank you, Nathan. And you mentioned earlier that AI has been a big topic for your team recently. A lot of leaders are trying to figure out how this shift actually is going to happen. And how has AI changed the way your brands think about growth?
Yeah. So AI kind of flipped the digital marketing space on its head. I mean, that up to this point, it was whoever's spending the most money is going to show up the most. And now with AI kind of looking for indicators of someone being an expert in that field, content is more important. If it's educational driven, hyper local content coming from the locations themselves. Up to COVID, I think everybody kind of had pay-per-click on autopilot, and we didn't have to worry about it. And we had leads coming in the door, no problem. And that is completely 100% changed. Now we've got Performance Max. That's an AI platform that Google's using, and it's constantly growing and improving its systems. And that's kind of taking the place of the traditional pay-per-click and, service ads listings. And then on top of that, even more than before, it's crazy important to be focused on your Google business pages and what content you're pushing out that kind of cements you as the expert in the field. So we've seen a big shift and had to kind of really adjust our strategies to be hyper local focused, content driven stuff. So a lot of engagement on Meta and Google to really drive that piece. And that's been a tough change. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And with AI, what is hype and what is actually useful?
So with any AI platform, it takes a long time for them to learn what actually is working. And so I think a lot of people have this misconception of, oh, there's this new AI platform that's going to drive amazing leads to my business. And that's not necessarily the case. It's got to take time to kind of optimize, like you would see with those initial marketing campaigns that you start. And so for Performance Max, for example, a lot of people tried that 2-3 years ago, and they're like, it's terrible. We don't get anything out of it. There's zero visibility. Trash it. We're never going to use it. Well, in the past 2 years, it's learned so much that now we're seeing that the output is actually justifying the costs and what you're putting into it. And so what platform a lot of people wrote off early on is actually super viable now. So I think there's a kind of a long game that you have to play with AI in terms of determining if it's smart enough at this point to invest into to be something that drives the business. But if you diversify your marketing spend, if one piece isn't working, then you just swap that to something that's got a better ROI. So you're not too reliant on that like you could be with referrals.
Okay. And Nathan, what advice would you give to leaders who feel like they're behind on AI adoption?
Yeah. So, home service brands are typically built on kind of this good old boy mentality, and being tech savvy is kind of a challenge initially. So for our space, it's been one small step at a time. So we spent the last 6 months educating our owners on what little 30-second videos look like, how to format those, how to upload them onto all the different social media accounts, tags, and different ways to drive visibility on those. So we just started with the videos because the video content seems to have the highest interaction with the customer base. So we started there, and then we worked on our Google business pages and started incorporating more photos and videos. And are you interacting with your customers? And so I think that you can take it on a step-by-step basis and just kind of prioritize where the biggest gap is and build from there. So that's what we did, and I think that's working really well.
Okay. Sometimes the biggest growth lessons come from things that didn't work. What's something you thought would work but didn't?
Yeah, I think it goes back to people thinking that they can find a sweet spot with their marketing mix and then leave it and it's going to be fine. I think things with this AI piece are going to make marketing change even faster, and the aggressiveness that you have to constantly be monitoring and changing and evolving with what's happening on the AI front is going to be something that's going to catch everybody a little bit off guard with. So yeah, I would say that probably to me is the thing that kind of keeps me up a little bit at night is what's the next strategy that we have to kind of plan for to try to stay ahead. The reality is I don't think we can. I mean, it moves so fast and it's hard to get people trained. And, so I think for me, it's just kind of like cherry picking the low hanging fruit and what can we do now to impact the lead volume and our presence online and those pieces.
Okay. What mistakes do you see companies repeat over and over?
I would say not actively tracking your return on investment on those pieces, on the marketing pieces. I would say that I see companies that want to provide a new product or service or want to incorporate something new. And there's just kind of this consistent theme of jumping in waist deep without having your boots on kind of situations. Franchising in general is notorious for that, rolling out softwares and different things that we probably could have taken more time to develop internally before hitting owners with the changes. And I would say that's the single biggest frustration I've seen both in the corporate world and in this franchising space and small business too, is making changes, searching for those shiny objects when the infrastructure is not there to make those a success from the start.
Okay. So Nathan, you're seeing growth from a multi-brand leadership vantage point, and that's rare. So I want to zoom out. What separates companies that scale successfully from those that stall?
Yeah. My kind of mantra is if you're comfortable where you're at, then you're doing something wrong. Business and entrepreneurship is not about being comfortable. It's about looking for the things to innovate and drive new business and push yourself outside of those boundaries. It's uncomfortable to scale. It's uncomfortable to hire employees when you're not quite sure yet if you need them. And even building out SOPs for things that are not even a part of the business can be uncomfortable for people. And so, that stalemate that happens, I think, is because either we get too comfortable and we assume that we don't have to innovate anymore at that point, or we're getting just enough out of it to where we're happy. But the reality is that the business world just evolves 24/7. And so there isn't an opportunity to sit back and just be happy unless it's kind of a retirement plan and growth isn't the focus there. I think you just have to be super proactive about where's our next level going to take us and how uncomfortable is that going to be? And if we're uncomfortable, that means that we are scaling correctly. I also see situations where there's kind of a business, I like to call it business trauma. So if something happened in the business that scared people or, caused some conflict, then that gets used as an excuse not to try to scale from that point. business partnerships and different things that go sour can kind of be examples of that. But I definitely see business trauma as being a reason that companies stall out as well. So you have to watch out for that. You have to be objective about big picture, what the goals are, and you can't let the stumbling blocks, stop the business in its tracks. So if you're comfortable, you're doing something wrong. So that's my motto.
Well, that's a great nugget of wisdom. Thank you. And Nathan, looking ahead, technology's moving fast, markets are shifting, and expectations are changing. What trends are you watching closely right now?
I think that given just the sheer volume of time and effort that's having to be put into keeping up with the social media, digital marketing space, one of the trends that I'm seeing is people shifting priorities around making sure that they've got staff in place who are good at that piece and who can keep up with those trends so that ownership and managers can focus on overall operational expansion. So I'm definitely seeing a shift in trends in terms of incorporating AI support and also internal staff that can manage social media and keep a pulse on what AI is doing. We typically always have a competitive edge with the franchising space because we're engaged with typically a big search engine optimization firm who always have their pulse on what's happening with Google. It's a little tougher if it's a small mom and pop business because you've got to do the research. You've got to have somebody kind of keeping an eye on what those trends are. So it kind of depends on the structure of the organization. But I think that we're going to see a big shift in prioritization around who's managing that piece of it.
Okay. And what excites you the most about where things are headed?
I think that the AI pieces are going to make our cost acquisition and some of the expenses around digital advertising less costly for owners. And we're already seeing a little bit of that, especially with Performance Max. So I think that with less human engagement in those processes, that the cost for that is going to drop. Now that's kind of a controversial thing. It can be good and bad, but I do think that we'll see those costs of acquisitions drop some as a result of the AI pieces being integrated. So I think that piece will be good. I think that if owners of businesses and managers and different levels are really proactive about having a team that is actively keeping their finger on the pulse of that it's easy to stay ahead of those trends. And, if you've got a strong game on the digital marketing piece and especially videos and your Google business page management, we're seeing kind of a shift in that trend of whoever's paying the most being the top leader there compared to whoever's showing the most as the expert in the field. So it kind of gives small businesses an opportunity to level the playing field with big businesses who typically dominated that digital space. So I think those are two things that we'll see happen and are already seeing happen is, a drop in acquisition costs and then also fair play for small businesses compared to the big guys.
Nathan, this has been a great conversation, and we really appreciate you sharing your perspective. But before we wrap, for listeners who want to learn more about premium service brands or connect with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got 9 really solid brands and our very close-knit group, and it's a great business group to be in. And we've seen the home services grow a ton just post-COVID because they're all essential businesses. So that's been great. And the best way to reach me is just by email. And it's in Cowan at premiumservicebrands.com. And we've got a solid development team. So if people are wanting more information on the franchises themselves or how we operate, please reach out. We're happy to chat and kind of share what we've got going on. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Excellent. And Nathan, what I'll do is, and for our listeners, look at the bottom of the podcast. I will put Nathan's contact information there so you can reach directly out to him. And Nathan, thanks again. And we really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. It's been fun.